Chapter 111. Nolan stretched out his palms to the back of her neck, jerked her forward, and kissed her lips harshly in a punitive manner. Nolan Goldman, let me go. Maisie, who had just gotten the chance to catch her breath, was kissed by him again. He directly pressed his body against hers this time around while she was assaulted with kisses, and her mind went blank. The man's aura surrounded her, and the hands that were resisting and pushing against his chest could only grasp the hem of his collar at that moment. It hurts. You're pressing against me. Maisie's arms were being crushed, and she screamed vaguely in pain. Nolan supported his body and tried not to put all his weight onto her. He then bit her lip lightly and said in a low voice, "Do you dare to hurt yourself again in the future?" Maisie did not answer. Nolan's palm, which was supporting her waist, started moving around. She shuddered all of a sudden and immediately applied pressure onto his restless and warm hand. It's my fault. I know it's my fault." Seeing that she was admitting her mistake willingly, Nolan sat up slowly while giving off a faint gaze. "I won't let you go again if you repeat yourself in the future." "Okay, I'll never let myself get hurt anymore." Maisie nodded obediently with an earnest expression. Nolan was rendered speechless. At that moment, someone knocked on the door, and Nolan turned his head. "Come in." 2 staff members walked in, carrying 2 boxes that contained an evening gown and a pair of heels in their hands. They stepped forward and said respectfully, "We're really sorry. Mr. Goldman and Ms. Zora, this has happened because of our negligence. Our boss has asked us to bring this new high-end gown to Ms. Zora in order to apologize to her. We sincerely hope that Ms. Zora will like them." The staff members opened the box, and a one-piece evening gown that had extremely exquisite craftsmanship appeared. The cutting of the gown and the golden embroidery on the upper body were all handmade, making it look exceptionally compact and fine. It was made from silk brocade, which was a high-quality fabric. Maisie smiled. "Please thank your boss for me." Nolan frowned slightly. His gaze was fixed on Maisie's indifferent face. "You know Erwin Lincoln? Erwin is the person who gave her the black invitation card, isn't he?" "Yes." Maisie did not deny it. Apart from the fashion industry, Erwin actually had a lot of ties with all business circles, not to mention that he had always occupied a prominent position in all the circles. He was the person who had organized the socialite party. Not only did he hold such celebrity events, but he also had his hand in many charity evenings and masquerades. "How did you meet?" Nolan stared at her. Maisie was puzzled. "Why are you asking about this?" Nolan approached her. "I want to know." He had always felt that this woman was hiding other secrets from him. "I'm Zora, the well-renowned jewelry designer. Is it strange for me to know Mr. Lincoln?" She shrugged, feeling that her answer was indeed flawless. Nolan looked at her and did not utter another word. Maisie grabbed the evening gown and got up. "I'm going to change into this dress." Nolan turned his head and watched as she walked toward the other room, lowering his gaze at the same time. Erwin was a native of Norwich. This man had always been very proficient when it came to forming interpersonal circles and jumping from one circle to another. That was how he seemed to have connections with half of the business circles around the world. In fact, he had always maintained a good relationship with the local law enforcers and mafias in Norwich. He was not someone that anybody could trifle with. Only the metropolitans of Norwich, who had such public relations, could make use of the vast interpersonal circle that they possessed to go from one circle to another and expand their social circle even further. If Maisie were to have met Erwin only because of her identity as the designer Zora, provided that she only left Zlokova 6 years ago and had only become Zora after that, while Erwin has been in Zlokova for the past 6 years. Chapter 112. Therefore, Maisie must have met and known Erwin earlier than 6 years ago. Nolan was thinking about something when he saw a graceful silhouette appearing in his sight. The crane embroidery on the evening gown looked well-proportioned, dazzlingly glamorous. The vest underneath the dress accentuated its wearer's slender waist, and the smooth curves that it emphasized were extremely eye-catching. When the evening dress was worn on Maisie's body, it made her look like a beauty that came out of a stunning painting. She looked so phenomenal that no one could afford to blink or take their eyes off her. Nolan stared at her closely, and his eyes lit up. This seductive fairy. I really want to rip off the beauty and elegance that she's wearing on the surface and feast on her vigorously. Maisie seemed to have picked up the menacing intent in the eyes of the man, so she turned around and wanted to escape. Just as she was stretching her hand out to open the door, an arm passed by her waist and blocked the door. The man embraced her slim waist with his palm, leaned over, and approached her. "Z, you look so gorgeous." He bowed his head and kissed her slender neck. "Nolan Goldman." "Stop it." Maisie could feel the wild aura coming from behind her scorching her body, and she had not done anything yet. "Why is this bag so horny?" Nolan lifted his fingertips, turned her face, and kissed her lips. Maisie could not resist Nolan's strength. His body would turn into a brick wall whenever he hugged her, making it very difficult for her to fight back. Nolan caressed her greedily. "My hand, it hurts." Hearing her euphemistic complaint, Nolan returned to his senses all of a sudden. "Damn it, what the hell am I doing? I know very clearly that her arm has been injured, I'm sorry." Nolan apologized to her subserviently and humbly. It was the first time that he had admitted his mistakes in front of a woman. Maisie scoffed inwardly. Did he really plan to gobble me up if it weren't for my deliberate scream? He even said that I wouldn't be forced, bag. I'll truly be pissed if you do this again. Maisie turned her face away. She was not very familiar with Nolan's temperament. She could only confirm that he was a man that reasons could persuade but could not be cowed by force. She clearly knew that he would get all over her forcibly if she were to put on a rough attitude. She had finally gotten a hang of the fact that submission was really effective to this man after submitting to him a few times. Nolan turned her around. Looking at her expression when she was reprimanding him, Nolan was extremely glad deep down. At least she didn't give me the cold shoulder. And her attitude isn't as rough as before. Then when will you be willing to do so? He asked her anxiously, as if he was a boy who wanted candy from his mother because he did not know whether he would fail to hold himself back someday. Maisie looked at him fixedly. Do all men think with your balls instead of your brain? I'm not sure if all men would do so. Nolan lifted her chin. But I only have this idea when I'm around you. In other words, he would react like that only when he was with her. Maisie was rendered speechless. Nolan rubbed the corners of her lips with his fingers and lowered his voice. You should know that. I've been holding it back over the past 6 years. It was inevitable that he would lose it someday. Maisie cast a sideways glance at him. Didn't Willow deliver herself to your doorstep? I bet my life that Willow must have tried to tuck herself into his bed several times over the years. I'm not very convinced that he hadn't touched the woman who had been with him for 6 years. Nolan's eyes dimmed slightly. I have no feelings for her. Oh, is that it? Maisie gently pushed his body away and suggested, then you can stay here and do it yourself. I'm heading out already. Can you bear to do so? Nolan walked up to her. The leader of the wolf pack had turned into a poor pet. Z, he's so pitiful. He's pleading for love. Maisie did not have a word for that. Chapter 113. Maisie changed into the evening gown and walked out of the restroom to the banquet with Nolan. The two of them were dazzlingly captivating when they appeared at the banquet. Nolan was still as indifferent and expressionless as usual. And Maisie did not dare to look at him anymore after witnessing the spectacular scene. I've done nothing. Can I suffer from amnesia starting from what happened just now? Z. Kennedy walked toward her, looking all worried. Is your injury okay? It's okay. It's a puny injury, and it's been dealt with. Maisie smiled. Nolan wrapped his arms around Maisie's waist and smiled faintly at Kennedy. Don't worry, Mr. Fannin, I'll take care of her now that I'm here. Standing in the crowd, Willow tightened the grip of her hand that was holding a wine glass. Everyone's attention is on Maisie and Nolan. She gnashed her teeth bitterly while listening to the enviable remarks of those around her. I should be the one who's standing next to him. Maisie shouldn't have come back. Or perhaps she shouldn't have existed. A hint of murderous coldness flashed across her eyes as she thought of something. She then turned around and disappeared into the crowd. Maisie noticed Willow's departure and thought of something. So she pushed Nolan's hand away. I need to go to the restroom. Do you need me to come with you? Nolan squinted. Maisie turned her head and glared at him. The word pervert could clearly be sensed from her expression. Nolan could only respond with a smile. Willow came to the corridor and saw Pearl on the phone. She smiled and walked up to her. Miss Santiago. Pearl was still exasperated about being driven out of the party, so her facial expression turned even more enraged instantly when she saw Willow. She hung up the call and asked, with a sharp tone, What do you want? Are you here to make fun of me? You've misunderstood me, Miss Santiago. I'm here to help you. You're here to help me? Pearl looked at her suspiciously. Aren't you her elder sister? Why would you be so kind? Willow bit her lip and explained, My relationship with her isn't as good as you think it is. We're just half-sisters. To be honest, I hate her as much as you do. Pearl whispered, You said you could help me, what can you do then? Would I be chased out of the banquet if it wasn't for Mr. Goldman? Damn it, I didn't expect that woman to be Mr. Goldman's girlfriend. Isn't Mr. Goldman the only person that she can rely on? Would Mr. Goldman still want to be with her if she were to lose all her standing and reputation? Willow raised her eyes, and a trace of complacency could be seen beaming from the bottom of her eyes. Pearl paused and looked at her. What's the plan that you have in mind? Willow curled her lips. She won't be able to escape her fate tonight as long as we work together. It'd be very exciting if she could make it onto tomorrow's headlines. Standing behind the wall, Maisie heard the scheme of the two in the corridor. Her eyes turned cold and gloomy as soon as she heard what they were discussing. I knew that Willow wouldn't leave so easily. It turns out that she's come to Pearl for help. Maisie took out her cell phone and sent a message to someone. It seems that there will be a great show tonight. Willow returned to the banquet hall again and saw that Maisie was not with Nolan. It'll be a piece of cake if Nolan isn't by her side, but I know that Maisie won't believe in me, so I can only wait for Pearl to take action. She should be making the arrangements now. She received a text message from Pearl on her cell phone while she saw a bartender walking toward Maisie with a wine tray. The bartender came to Maisie and whispered something to her. After listening to what the bartender had to offer, Maisie put down the wine glass in her hand without any doubt and left the hall with the bartender. Willow felt smug deep down when she saw the outcome. Chapter 114. After making the arrangements, Pearl deliberately went to tell Nolan about the incident. She then took a group of people out in search of Maisie. I bet Maisie should have become the plaything of those people when we managed to locate her. Willow really could not wait to witness that scene now. Maisie Vanderbilt will definitely be ruined tonight, so what if her kids are Nolan's? The Goldman will never take in such a filthy woman. Maisie followed the bartender to the lounge, and Pearl was there in the lounge, waiting for her. After the bartender left, Pearl got up and walked toward her. Ms. Vanderbilt, I'm sorry, the incident from before is all my fault. I wanted to meet you alone, just to apologize to you. Can you forgive me? Pearl grabbed her hand with a solemn expression, seeking her forgiveness. Her acting skills are so believable that I might really think she's learned her lesson if I didn't already know about their plan. She pulled her hand out slowly and smiled. Miss Santiago. Do you really want to apologize to me? Of course, I do. Pearl asserted with a little guilty conscience, but she must not let the other party notice anything wrong. I admit that I was too impulsive and have hurt you. I'm really sorry, can you forgive me? Miss Santiago. It's not that I don't want to give you the opportunity to do so. Maisie slowly turned the snake ring on her finger, and her tone sounded unconcerned. But, you've never thought about apologizing to me from the very beginning, am I right? Pearl's expression changed slightly. What? What are you talking about? I'm definitely here to apologize. Miss Santiago, I'll give you another chance. What do you want from me? Maisie's eyes looked cold. Pearl was a little panicked. No, this bitch shouldn't know about anything, right? No, I mustn't let her know our plan. I won't be able to continue to stay in the upper-class circle in the future if this scheme goes south. If you have nothing else to say, then I'll take my leave first. Do you think you can leave now? Pearl grabbed her and shouted abruptly. Come out. Several brawny men who were hiding in a room in the lounge walked out of the room. Maisie's eyes dimmed slightly. Miss Santiago, are you sure you want to do this? So what, anyway, no one will come to rescue you even if you were to scream your throat out today. Aren't you an arrogant bitch who thinks you're Mr. Goldman's girlfriend? Let me tell you now, I'm not someone to be trifled with either. Pearl pushed Maisie into the midst of those men. The strong men grabbed Maisie, and one of the men covered her mouth and nose with a cloth. She tried to struggle for a while, but gradually lost consciousness. Seeing that Maisie had passed out, Pearl walked up to her. Who do you think you are? You'll be just another nobody after tonight. After saying so, she said to the men. Guys, enjoy yourself. Yes. Young lady. Those brawny men were currently very excited and restless. This woman looks really gorgeous. It's totally worth it to get paid $80,000 just to rape such an attractive woman. As soon as Pearl walked out of the private lounge, she was unsuspectingly knocked out by a man in black who was standing outside the door. The brawny men turned around upon hearing the commotion that came from outside the door and saw a man in black with tattoos on his neck dragging Pearl, who had fainted, back into the lounge. The man in black then slowly pulled a pistol out of his suit. Don't move. Maisie, who had already been stunned, pointed the sharp end of the snake ring on her finger against the neck of the man in front of her. If you don't want to die, just cooperate obediently. Whether it was the gun or the threat from the woman behind them, the brawny men raised their hands in fright. We were hired to do so, we don't know anything. Chapter 115. Maisie walked to the man in black, grabbed a cell phone out of the unconscious woman's body, unlocked it with her fingerprint, and sent a message to Willow. Let's get her to come here in another 20 minutes. After sending the message, she put the phone back into her pocket and stood up. Mr. Khan, I'll leave this to you. The man in black nodded. Maisie left the lounge and walked toward the balcony. The middle-aged man standing on the balcony had his long blonde hair tied behind him. He turned around slowly, revealing the retro silver-rimmed thin-frame glasses that had a chain embellishment and a dark black suit, which made him look extremely exquisite. Uncle Irwin, what a coincidence. Maisie leaned forward with a playful expression. The gentle middle-aged man in front of her was Irwin. From the outside, it was hard to believe that the owner of this astoundingly attractive half-blood appearance was actually 45 years old. If it weren't because Maisie had known him since long ago, she would not have believed it herself. Irwin lifted his hand and rubbed her head. How would you have the guts to take such a risk? Weren't you afraid that I wouldn't be able to get Khan over in time? That's because I have faith in you, Maisie replied. Even if the whole world betrays me, I will still believe in Uncle Irwin. Riley was the one who had helped her go abroad 6 years ago. During all those years in Staslo, she had actually also received assistance from Uncle Irwin in addition to Riley's. If it weren't for him, she would have been bullied a long time ago in that unfriendly and helpless country of Staslo. She had known Uncle Irwin since she was still very young because of her mother. Although she still did not know much about her mother's relationship with Uncle Irwin. The only thing that she could tell was that Uncle Erwin was the only person who knew the identity of her mother. Young lady, that's really worrying. Erwin's tone sounded as if he was reproaching Maisie, but his warm eyes showed otherwise. As he had regarded Maisie as his biological niece after all these years. He already knew that Maisie had returned to Zlokova long ago. He had not contacted her all this while because she did not intend to use her relationship with him to get the revenge that she wanted. This girl only wants to rely on herself. Erwin placed his hand on her shoulder. Well, you should go back to the banquet now, don't make Kennedy worry about you. I should go back now, wouldn't I miss the climax if I were to do so? Maisie raised her eyebrows. Erwin noticed the horrible idea that she was actualizing and smiled. I'm fine with anything as long as you're happy. As for the Santiago, just leave them to me, you can just enjoy your night as much as you like. The person in charge of the socialite party was on the sidelines, dealing with the accident that had occurred earlier today. They must provide Mr. Goldman with an explanation no matter what. After all, the person in charge of the banquet party could not afford to offend Mr. Goldman either. Nolan glanced at the crowd from time to time as if he was looking for someone else, but he had not seen Maisie after a long time of scanning, so his eyes dimmed slightly. He put down his wine glass. You guys can just deal with it as you see fit. I have something else to attend to. Nolan was about to start looking for Maisie when Willow rushed toward him in a hurry. Nolan, this is bad. Willow came up to him with a distressed look. Z's gone, I've been looking for her. But I haven't seen her at all after a long time. Nolan's eyes were cold and stern. Are you sure that she's missing? Willow bit her lip as she was on the verge of weeping. Nolan, I know you don't believe me, but I'm not lying to you. The most urgent task now is to locate Z as soon as possible. She scoffed inwardly. I want to find Maisie more than anyone now, as even I don't know which man she's sleeping with now. Chapter 116. Mr. Goldman, Kennedy came over all of a sudden. Have you seen Z? I couldn't get through when I called her. Willow pretended to be surprised as soon as Kennedy said so. What, you couldn't get through? Could something has happened to Z? Kennedy stared at Willow suspiciously. Why would she care about Z? No way, is someone really doing such things in the lounge? Why would I lie to you? We wanted to go to the lounge just now, but we heard voices coming from inside. Those people aren't even afraid of being discovered. The conversation between a few women who walked by caught Nolan's attention. Willow was secretly complacent when she saw Nolan's gloomy expression. She then said deliberately, the lounge, no way. When I asked the waiter about Z's whereabouts just now, the waiter told me that Z seemed to have gone to the lounge. Nolan's eyes were cold and dim as he walked toward the lounge. Willow looked at Nolan's back while he departed and sneered inwardly. Maisie, oh, Maisie. You'll no longer be qualified to fight with me after tonight. When Nolan arrived at the lounge, several waiters were standing outside the room, knocking on the door and shouting. While all those were going on, indescribable voices could be faintly heard coming from the interior of the room. And everyone knew what was going on in the lounge. Willow even attracted more people to the scene deliberately. She then pretended to be worried when she arrived outside the door and heard the voice inside. Oh my, the person inside the lounge is Z, isn't it? Nolan gave her a cold glare. What makes you think she's inside? Willow was startled and bit her lip. I can't confirm it either, I only listened to what the waiter told me. At this time, the waiter who had brought Maisie to the lounge came out of the crowd. I did see Ms. Vanderbilt enter the lounge. And she hasn't come out ever since. And I also saw a few men entering the room after her. Ms. Vanderbilt? Oh my God, are they talking about Mr. Goldman's girlfriend? This is quite the news, isn't it? The crowd started murmuring. This is simply too huge of a headline. Mr. Goldman's girlfriend is in the room with other men. And there are a few of them. Isn't she cuckolding Mr. Goldman? Kennedy gnashed his teeth. That's impossible. Z is not such a woman. The person inside is definitely not her. Nolan snorted without saying a word. The manager brought the key to the lounge. Willow was undoubtedly excited while she was watching the manager open the door of the lounge. Everyone will get to see the filthy side of that bitch real soon. After the door was pushed open, everyone behind them took out their cell phones to take pictures. After all, this was a rare and fiery scene. The first scene that caught everyone's eyes was a few disheveled men leaning next to a woman, and the woman's dress was all torn and messy, and her cheeks were flushed. Even though everyone had broken into the lounge, she still could not separate herself from them, as if she had lost her mind. Willow's expression changed in an instant when she saw that woman's face. How could it be her? Oh my God, it turns out to be Miss Santiago. Photos. Don't forget to snap some photos. Wow, this is quite an exciting scene. The staff members of the ballroom could not stand it anymore, so they quickly got more employees to go into the crowd and haul all the people away from the room. This was when those men gradually regained consciousness, including Pearl. One of the staff members wrapped her coat around Pearl as Pearl came back to her senses in a trance and found that everyone was taking pictures of her with their cell phones. When she saw the bruises and fluid on her body and the men lying around her, Pearl's cheeks gradually turned pallid. No. This shouldn't be. She crumbled and yelled frantically, "Ah!" Chapter 117. How so? Why is it her? What happened? Maisie slowly appeared behind the crowd as if nothing had happened before, pretending that she did not know anything. Kennedy stepped forward hurriedly. Z, where have you been? Why would they say that you're? I answered a call and went out. What's the matter? Maisie pretended to be puzzled. Nolan stared at her. In fact, he already knew that it was not her when he heard the woman's voice from outside the room just now. As for Willow, her hands that were resting on both sides clenched tightly into fists and trembled slightly when she saw Maisie appear from behind the crowd. Fuck, it should have been this bitch. How did it become Miss Santiago? This is bad. After Pearl saw Maisie, her expression became distorted instantly. It's you, you're the one who did this to me. She got up to pounce at Maisie immediately but was stopped by the security guard who had just gotten summoned to the scene by the staff members. You bitch, you're the one who set me up. I won't let this slide. I'll never let you go. Pearl screamed and cried. Maisie tilted her head and gave off an innocent expression. I'm the one who set you up, Miss Santiago. What do you mean by that? This is you reaping the fruits of your own actions, isn't it? I've already given you a chance to repent and give up on the idea. It's you should have been the one who suffers from all this, but you've set me up, you've ruined me. Pearl had long lost her cool. She had been ruined, completely ruined. Miss Santiago. I'm curious now that you say so. What do you mean by, I should be the one who suffers from all this? Maisie asked and then pretended to have arrived at a lightbulb moment. So, are you saying that you were planning to cause me harm? No wonder there was a waiter who told me that you were waiting for me in the lounge and asked me to come over. She took a glance at the crowd and saw the waiter who had lowered his head due to a guilty conscience. She then walked up to the waiter and pulled him out of the crowd. Young man. You're the one who asked me to come to the lounge, aren't you? The waiter did not even know what was going on. He had just brought her to the lounge. According to Miss Santiago's instruction, all there was left was to confirm that she had entered the lounge. But who knew that she was not there? I originally wanted to come over, but I picked up a call on my way here and left. I planned to come back to meet Miss Santiago after I answered the call. Who knew? Maisie looked at Pearl. Miss Santiago, I don't remember being on bad terms. So why would you want to do this to me? Pearl's face was pale, and her body trembled as she heard the mockery, finger-pointing, and discussions of the people around her. Who would pity me at this moment? One Pearl had always been an arrogant and presumptuous woman in the upper-class circle of Basburg and had offended many people. Now that she had fallen to this point in life, it was very lucky of her that no one was adding insult to her injuries. Willow wanted to take the opportunity to escape from the scene, but Pearl saw her keenly. "That's right, it's all because of her horrible idea. It's you, don't you dare leave now, this is all because of your idea, bitch, you lied to me." Pearl rushed toward Willow abruptly. Everything happened so suddenly that the security guard did not, "It's not me, this has nothing to do with me." Pearl was hauling Willow's hair, and she almost lost her evening gown to Pearl's hands. The security guards finally suppressed Pearl. Willow was in a mess at the moment. Facing everyone's suspicion, she shook her head vigorously. "No, it's not me, I didn't." "Nolan, you have to believe me." Her heart skipped a beat as she gazed at Nolan's indifferent expression. She was like a joker throughout the whole process. Facing the public opinion that was clashing against her, she gave up on the idea of explaining or fighting back and straight up passed out on the floor. Seeing that Willow had fainted, Maisie could not help but mock her deep down. Her acting skills are getting better and better by the day. She's actually trying to escape everything by pretending to have blacked out. Chapter 118. It's a pity that she cannot escape the discord that she has sowed with Pearl. Inside the car, Nolan drove the car back to the Goldman mansion. Maisie, who was sitting in the front passenger seat, kept looking out the window of the car. This man hasn't spoken a word. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? When he stopped the car at the red light intersection, Nolan turned to look at her, his eyes scorching. Maisie felt it all. She turned her head and met his gaze. "Mr. Goldman. May I know why you are looking at me like that?" He raised his eyebrows slightly. "Do I need a reason to look at my woman?" Maisie gave off a smirk. "Being your woman is quite a risky job." "I don't think you would say so if I were to be the woman in the lounge tonight." Nolan's eyes turned indifferent and gloomy. "What would I do if the woman in the lounge was really her? I'm afraid that I'd kill the men who touched her." He looked away and smiled faintly. "It seems that I've underestimated you. In order to escape from those people, she either has the abilities to do so, or someone was helping her. I have to look into it carefully." Hashtag Pearl Santiago's affairs at the party. Hashtag Mr. Goldman's first girlfriend to go public. The next day, Pearl had managed to secure a spot on Google Trends, which had surpassed Nolan's public announcement about Maisie by a long shot, and it became the most explosive piece of news of the year. Subsequently, the host of the socialite party issued a notice announcing that Pearl would be permanently banned from attending any future socialite party. It was equivalent to removing Pearl from the list of socialites in Basburg. Pearl could now be regarded as utterly discredited in Basburg. Although her father, Antonio, wanted to defend his daughter's reputation, he still chose to apologize on behalf of his daughter due to public opinion and pressure. Maisie sat in the office, reading the news expressionlessly. "If I hadn't prepared myself in advance last night, then the person who would win the top spot on Google Trends and would be ridiculed by the public at this very moment would be me. Since Willow wants to set me up, then how can I let her go and not drag her into the turmoil and let her get a taste of her own medicine? Pearl has now been ruined, and the person who she hates the most is probably Willow, the mastermind who came up with the bad idea." Kennedy came in from outside the office with a grin. "Z, there's huge news." Maisie looked up. "What's the news about?" "Antonio seems to know that his daughter's downfall is related to Willow. Now, it seems that he's deliberately suppressing Vena jewelry. Vena's stock market has dropped by 15% today. Vena has suffered at least $3 million of loss overnight." Maisie supported her chin with only one hand. "Pearl wasn't part of my plan originally, it was Willow who dragged her into the mud. Now it seems that they've saved me the trouble to even act." Kennedy looked at her. "Z, since Mr. Goldman announced his relationship with you this time around, I think the Santiago won't have the guts to make a move on you." I only worry that Willow will put all the blame onto you. He had managed to guess that what had happened last night was somewhat related to Willow, and Pearl was just the unlucky pawn. Otherwise, all of this would have happened to Z today. As for Willow, she probably would not admit that that was all her scheme. Maisie slowly raised her head. Uncle Kennedy, please help me make an appointment with Mrs. Santiago. At the Santiago Manor. Get out of here. Pearl smashed everything in the room and prevented the servants from getting near her. Mrs. Santiago walked into the room and saw her daughter's defeated look. How could she not feel sorry for her? She stepped forward and suggested, Pearl, why are you doing this to yourself? Listen to me and eat something first. I don't want to eat. Pearl roared with bloodshot eyes. I've become Basberga's biggest joke. How could I live on to meet any other people? Chapter 119. Looking at Pearl crying so heartbroken, Mrs. Santiago hugged her. Isn't it just the Vanderbilts? Don't worry, your father won't let the Vanderbilts go now, so listen to me and eat something first. After finally calming Pearl's emotions, the butler appeared outside the door of the room. Madam, Pearl wanted to tear her apart badly upon hearing the name Maisie Vanderbilt. I don't want to see that bitch. I don't want to. It's because of her. It's all because of her. Mrs. Santiago calmed her emotions and asked with a stern expression, she's ruined my daughter's future and is shameless enough to pay her a visit? The butler lowered his head. This Miss Vanderbilt is Mr. Goldman's girlfriend. She said that she wants to talk to the young lady. Mr. Goldman's girlfriend? Could it be the one that Mr. Goldman announced last night? Mrs. Santiago's brows creased. The Santiago can't afford to offend any of the Goldman, but Pearl has become like this. Her life has been completely ruined. Is this Miss Vanderbilt here to mock Pearl and rub more salt on her wound? She's here to talk. What else can she talk about? She took a glimpse at her emotionally unstable daughter, got up, and said, I'll talk to her. The butler brought Maisie into the manor. The person who wanted to see her was not Pearl, but Mrs. Santiago. Mrs. Santiago sat on the couch with a solemn expression. My daughter has become like this thanks to you, Vanderbilts, and yet you still have the guts to come to the Santiago looking for my daughter. Do you plan to further embarrass us, Santiago? Maisie walked up to Mrs. Santiago and explained with a calm tone, Mrs. Santiago, I'm not here to embarrass the Santiago today. Even if the incident that took place last night is related to the Vanderbilts, it has nothing to do with me. To be honest, I was actually the intended victim. The intended victim? Mrs. Santiago snorted. Isn't my daughter the current victim while you're standing here totally unscathed? Don't mention anything related to that incident if you're not standing in my daughter's shoes. Maisie raised her eyebrows slightly, and her tone became a little cold. I understand that you feel bad for your daughter, but if I were to be the victim of last night's incident, wouldn't my mother feel bad for me too? Although my mother has passed away. Mrs. Santiago was stunned for a split second and did not speak another word. Mrs. Santiago, you should listen to this recording first. Maisie took out her cell phone and played an audio clip that she had recorded last night. Mrs. Santiago could hear her daughter's voice clearly in the recording. And this had caused Mrs. Santiago's expression to change slightly. Maisie had not kept herself idle and turned herself into a sitting duck last night. Since Willow asked Pearl to join forces with her to set me up, how could I not collect a piece of evidence? Mrs. Santiago, you should have heard it. Your daughter was instigated into trying to set me up first. I knew about their conspiracy before it even began, but I still went to see your daughter. I gave your daughter a chance to repent. But she still insisted on proceeding with the scheme and even hired goons in advance. I would have become the person on the news today if it weren't for my narrow escape. Now tell me, is your daughter as innocent as you think she is? Mrs. Santiago had a lump in her throat and was left speechless. But that was her biological daughter. Her daughter's life had been ruined now, so how could anyone expect her not to be heartbroken as a mother? The Santiago are people who uphold righteousness, And I believe that you share the same belief with your family. Your daughter wouldn't have been confused to this extent if it weren't for the instigations. Maisie started her counteroffer by praising the Santiago. If Mrs. Santiago still insists on settling this account with me, it'll only show that she's a petty woman that can't tell the right from the wrong, judging from how much she loves her daughter. What would she do after knowing that her daughter has been exploited and used by others? Mrs. Santiago's expression could not help but dim. Who's the person who instigated my daughter? Chapter 120. She's one of the Vanderbilts too. She's my half-sister, and she's my stepmother's daughter. Mrs. Santiago looked up at her. What do you plan to achieve by coming here to see my daughter? I can provide your daughter with a chance for redemption. Provided that your daughter is willing to repent. Judging from the popularity of this news, it is estimated that it'll continue to trend for quite a while. Everyone thinks that your daughter has fallen out of her own will. But I believe that you want everyone to think that your daughter was wronged, am I right? The idea obviously moved Mrs. Santiago. Yes, Pearl is in the limelight now. How can she meet anyone in the future if she can't get past any of these limelights? Instead of allowing the public to think that Pearl is a problematic lady, it's better to make everyone believe that Pearl had been framed. The sympathy that originates from the public's empathy could at least save Pearl's innocence and chastity. Being framed is a totally different story from degenerating willingly. Although this incident has already happened and it's impossible to completely erase it, as long as Pearl can keep her reputation, it's definitely better than being pointed out for the rest of her life. At this time, Maisie received a notification from Facebook and Twitter on her cell phone. She tapped on the notification and saw the updates. As expected, Willow had pushed all the blame onto Pearl, although the turmoil had not affected Willow. The latter's quick reaction was an obvious effect of the Santiago suppression that the Vanderbilts were facing at the moment. Mrs. Santiago, you should take a look at this. Maisie handed her phone to Mrs. Santiago. Mrs. Santiago's expression changed when she saw Willow's post. This woman is actually shameless enough to frame my daughter again. Willow had won many fans because of the popularity that she gained through her recent designs, so the comment section was filled with comments from fans who supported her. Mrs. Santiago, don't get too agitated. Just wait till the moment she slaps herself in the face. Maisie smirked. Mrs. Santiago looked at her. Ms. Vanderbilt, I'll thank you no matter what if you truly are able to help Pearl. Pearl is in a very bad condition, so please help her. Mrs. Santiago had no choice but to believe her. Maisie gave off a faint smile. Don't worry, I'm a woman of my words, but I hope that your daughter will genuinely repent for what she's done. Otherwise, don't say that I didn't give her any chance if anything were to happen in the future. Mrs. Santiago paused. How can I not get the meaning behind these words? She is making it clear that she might be willing to help Pearl today, but she won't show Pearl any mercy if Pearl were to do something to harm her again in the future. Her daughter was involved in this scheme in the first place and was caught red-handed by others, which was very embarrassing to her. Hence, there was nothing else that she could say apart from making a promise. Don't worry. I'll definitely educate my daughter after this. Ever since Willow had posted the posts, there were thousands of views, hundreds of shares, hundreds of comments underneath the posts, and the numbers were still on the rise. However, when all the public opinion was targeting Pearl, the clarifications of the several parties that were detained in the detention center attracted a lot of attention on the internet. In just a few hours, the title #Pearl Santiago being framed hashtag had risen to become one of the top searches on Google, gaining more than tens of millions of hits. The several suspects that appeared in the hashtag clarification video all confessed that it was Ms. Willow who had hired them to frame Ms. Santiago. They also mentioned that Ms. Santiago had been drugged at the moment, just like all of them, and they had no idea what they were doing. Hashtag it's a MBLON hashtag what a vicious woman. Hashtag hires brother framing others with drugs, what a disgusting act. She's ruined another person's reputation for a lifetime.